Enforced disappearance remains a harsh daily reality for millions across the globe. When someone is forcibly disappeared, it inflicts unimaginable suffering not only on the individual but also on their family, community, and society as a whole. Beyond the personal pain, enforced disappearances represents a grave violation of fundamental human rights. In Tibet, under the governance of the Chinese authorities, enforced disappearances have become alarmingly common. Last week, the Department of Information and International Relations of Central Tibetan Administration expresses deep concern and strongly condemns the persistent and widespread cases of Tibetans being forcibly disappeared in Tibet on the International Day of Victims of Enforced Disappearance. To bring more attention to this critical issue, we are joined today by Tenzin Kunkhen from the DIIR's Human Rights Desk, who will share insights into recent cases of enforced disappearances in Tibet and provide updates on the efforts to address this ongoing human rights violation. Kunkhen, welcome back to our program.
Thank you so much, Pandela, for having me.
And thank you for being here. So I'd like to ask you, can you talk to us about some of the recent cases of enforced disappearance in Tibet?
So it is true that in China, and particularly in Tibet, under the rule of the PRC government, in recent years, the enforced disappearance cases of Tibetans have continued to rise. Despite repeated international appeals and calls on China to stop and end the practice of enforced disappearance. So basically, Tibetan people are being charged or alleged on a fabricated charges of, like endangering the state security as well as leaking state secrets. But merely the Tibetan people are exercising their basic fundamental human rights. And the Chinese government deemed and see these Tibetan people as a threat to their governance, and unlawfully they put these fabricated charges on Tibetans. But in reality, according to the international law, when we see it, the expression of Tibetans, of their religious culture and their own identity, is not a threat to the Chinese national security as per the international law. But China somehow put these charges against the Tibetans, and as we see, almost every cases of Tibetans arrested in Tibet they constitute the enforced disappearance, because firstly, the Tibetans, when they were arrested, the family members and the relatives, they are not being informed of these arrests. And secondly, when a person is disappeared, that person becomes vulnerable to like the person comes under the mercy of the law enforcement authorities, in this case the Chinese security officials. And once the person comes under the mercy of the authorities, they are deprived of their rights as well as their protection from the fair trial that needs to be there for every individual. And so basically we see that every Tibetan cases becomes enforced disappearance, in my opinion. Yeah.
Can you highlight some of those Tibetans who are arrested by the Chinese government and their whereabouts are not known so far to the general public and to the Tibetans in exile?
So, of course, the most distressing and the most prominent cases of the enforced disappearance in the context of Tibet is the disappearance of the 11th Panchen Lama, who was abducted in 1995 at the age of 6, and for 29 years the whereabouts and the conditions of the Panchen Lama is still unknown, and the Chinese government they repeatedly give excuses as well as they don't provide the substantial evidence that the international community and the governments, they want them to. And the saddest part is we Tibetans still don't know whether the Panchen Lama and his family members are still alive or not, because we haven't seen them since. And also just this year, so if I look into some of the cases that has happened in 2024, many Tibetans have been disappeared. And like I said before, the cases of Tibetans, they constitute enforced disappearance, because in every cases, the person, they are firstly arbitrarily arrested by the authorities without giving any reason, and secondly, the family members, even when they approach the security officials multiple times to get information on their loved ones who are detained, they are refused. And also yeah, so to give you some of the few cases, as you see, I have a lot of cases in my hand, but one thing in common is that they have all been enforcedly disappeared at the time of their arrest, and in almost every cases, the well-being and where they are currently located is not known to their family members as well as the community where they live. The first case that I have is that of the Tibetan singer. His name is Gekchum Doji. He was arrested in 12 February, and since then he has not been seen since until now. Despite repeated appeal from his family members to the Chinese government, they refused to give any reliable and substantial information on his whereabouts. Similarly, we have Tibetan man called Tamding, who was also abducted, and to this day we don't know where he is. And a monk from Kirti Monastery, as well as if I see a Tibetan man named Pinzok from Lhindup County, who was also arrested, and his whereabouts remain unknown to this day. So a lot of these cases are very similar, but if you look at the crime that the Chinese government claimed that they have committed, it is basically the exercising of their own, identity, the right to express, right to, freedom of speech that they should have, but the Chinese government, they, somehow deemed them as a threat to the national security, as I mentioned before, and they were being arbitrarily detained, and their whereabouts is not known to the world.
Can you tell us what are the rights and liberty of the Tibetans who are arrested through this procedure are taken away?
So yeah, it's an important question, and the answer to this will give you the picture of the gravity of the enforced disappearance of a person, because enforced disappearance is not just a violation of one particular law or a human rights instrument, but I think the enforced disappearance is the first step after which the multiple violations of human rights occurs. Because if I may refer to some of the notes that I have, like I mentioned, once a person is disappeared, that person is put outside the law, which means he doesn't have the protection of the fair trial, and he is not treated as per the legal procedures that he should, and which give rises to the lot of instances where the basic rights of that person is being deprived. For example, the right to recognition as a person before law, which is the right of a person to be treated fairly in a court. But once the person is enforcedly disappeared, that right becomes that right is not applicable anymore. And also the right to liberty and the security of a person. So the person who usually goes to enforce disappearance, they are at the mercy of the Chinese police, who you know which where the security of that person is compromised. And also the right to truth, that is more applicable to the family members, because when a person is disappeared, the family members, they have the right to know the truth. They have the right to know the circumstances of their loved ones who are in the detention. But the Chinese government, they also don't give these evidences and information to the family members. So the right to truth is also compromised. The right to life means every person has the right to live. But we so often see that once a person is unfortunately disappeared, we have seen many cases of Tibetans who have died in the detention centers, and only after their death the news comes to their family members. So the right to life means of that person has been compromised as a result of the enforced disappearance. And also the right to fair trial and judicial guarantees, as I mentioned before. They are put outside the law, so they don't have all these legal remedies that they should have. So, and also right to effective remedy, including reparation and compensation. We see that the Tibetan people, they were not given compensation for the crime that the Chinese government have committed on this person. We have seen cases where the Chinese government have promised that they will compensate monetary compensation to the victim, but somehow they didn't. They didn't live. They didn't put their promise, keep their promises. So, lastly, the right not to be subjected to torture and other cruel, inhuman, degrading treatment or punishment means that person have the right to be protected from any form of torture, ill treatment. But we see that once a person is enforcedly disappeared, and the Chinese authorities, they have committed and they have subjected these individuals to torture, physical torture as well. As a result, we see Tibetans have passed away as a result of these rights that were compromised because of the enforced disappearance.
In Tibet's case, the Chinese authorities disappeared Tibetans in Tibet, and because they were deemed threat to the society in Chinese law or Chinese standards. So, in that case, what kind of international law or the Chinese government or the authorities in Tibet are violating?
So yeah,
can you briefly speak about that?
Yeah, like I mentioned, first of all, the Chinese government, even if they are obligated to respect these international laws, but they blatantly and they openly disregard these these laws. And so yeah, and also if I give you a few of the international laws that are being violated as a result of the enforced disappearance, we see that China, as a founding member of the United Nations, has played a key role in drafting the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is the founding document on which the international human rights have been based. But when we look at all these international laws, we see that enforced disappearance is almost not legal, right, in all these international laws. But China still violate these international human rights instruments. If I give you a few examples, the International Convention for the Protection of All Persons from Enforced Disappearance, the instrument which is basically drafted in order to minimize or stop the enforced disappearing cases, but China they haven't yet signed or ratified this convention. The Declaration on the Protection of All Persons from Enforced Disappearance is another convention where the enforced disappearance is strongly opposed. And also, so there are a number of conventions, but it is important to see that even though some of the conventions, even though China has signed and ratified, which means they are legally obligated to respect every articles and laws, rules that that are in these international laws, but China still they still don't put these into practice, and which gives an idea that those conventions which the China has not yet ratified and signed, there's a very little chance that the Chinese government will protect and respect these laws.
So earlier in this conversation you have mentioned few of the Tibetans in Tibet in recent times who disappeared or who were forcefully disappeared by the Chinese government to undisclosed location or wherever, the information that we do not have. But those information and the names that came up to us in exile, to the government or the human rights group here. So what do you think the best way to bring about information on them to the world, and also to reach out to the UN bodies to pay attention to these Tibetans who were arrested by the Chinese government and whose rights that you have clearly mentioned were violated?
Yeah, so the United Nations have, if I may check the notes. So yeah, the United Nations have two bodies which are specifically there to cater to the families and victims of the enforced disappearance. The first one is the Working Group on Enforced Disappearance or Involuntary Disappearance, and then we have Committee on Enforced Disappearance. So these two are the international human rights mechanism to which a person, not the victim, but the relatives or the family or any organizations who work on behalf of the victims of the enforced disappearance, they can address, they can send these case studies, right, to these international human rights mechanism that I mentioned, and they will look into these cases, and then they will question the state or the government, the concerned government, which is the Chinese government in the context of Tibet, and then they will pressure the Chinese government to reveal, to disclose any information on these person who have been enforcedly disappeared. So this is one avenue that we can reach these human rights mechanisms and know the whereabouts and the well-being of the person who are enforcedly disappeared, and which is we see that the CTA have an Office of Tibet in Geneva, who consistently attend these human rights council meetings, where they will draw the attention of the member states on the cases of enforced disappearance as well as other cases. And we see that the human rights organizations such as Tibetan Center for Human Rights and Democracy, as well as the NGOs, they have also been communicating with these instruments and giving cases of Tibetans who are enforcedly disappeared in order to in order for Chinese government to reveal the information on these person who are being disappeared. And we see that as a result, we see that the UN human rights experts have recently, or a few years back, they have sent a communication to the Chinese government to disclose any information on the 9 Tibetan environmentalists, human rights defender, who have been arrested and sentenced to imprisonment. And also in the case of Gosherab Gyatso and Rinchen Sudim, who disappeared soon after their arrest, and for over a year their whereabouts have been unknown. But we see that the Chinese government have revealed or disclosed the information on their whereabouts only after the UN human rights mechanisms. They have written to the Chinese government to tell them to disclose this information on these two individuals. So these are the avenues that we can use in order to get information on the person or the Tibetans enforcedly disappeared in Tibet.
So Tenzin Kunkhen, these are my questions for this conversation. Thank you so much for taking out your time today to talk to us about this very important topic, this very important issue, enforced disappearance, specifically in Tibet. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
With this, we have come to the end of today's program of In Conversation with Tibettv. Thank you so much for watching.